This chart was published by a joint study of the Australia and New Zealand Productivity Commissions, but it is not exclusive to them, as the concept has been reviewed in geopolitical and international business programs throughout the world. Combined with the Monet method, it is the incremental path to deeper integration being followed by all regional blocs, though some, following Monet's model, would not likely confirm it at this time. All of the world's regional blocs are now traversing at varying speeds through the chart stages toward an intended political integration. The governments of Australia and New Zealand published this chart to illustrate their study, published in April 2012, of a plan to integrate their two economies, including issuance of a common currency. Their conclusion was favorable to the possibility. Australia and New Zealand are both members of the Pacific Islands Forum. Though great in area, the PIF is the weakest of all of the regions that could be considered major blocs.
The Pacific Island Forum's geographic sphere of influence is massive, covering 30 million square kilometers. This area stretches from the Marshall Islands in the north to New Zealand in the south, from Australia in the west to Kiribati in the east. The impact and influence of the Pacific Islands Forum is evident in nearly every major regional development in the last 30 years. These include the emergence of the Forum as the premier political organization of the region with a well-established secretariat. The Forum's success in promoting regional cooperation and integration through trade has given the Forum members far greater influence in international affairs than they would have as individuals.
It is uncertain whether this region will remain a viable region or be dissolved into one or more of the neighboring regions, such as SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. In 1973, the Club of Rome, an influential globalist think tank, proposed a 10-region global structure that had this region also containing South Africa, a fellow British Commonwealth member, along with Australia, New Zealand, and most of the PIF member island nations. The inclusion of South Africa, now a member of the BRICS Association of Emerging Industrial Nations, would have made this a more economically competitive region. However, since the fall of apartheid, South Africa has become engaged with the African Union, and the current chairperson of the African Union Commission is South African Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Even so, Australia-New Zealand integration is likely.
At a lunch of the who's who of big business, a single economic market was on everyone's lips.
There's great energy about this trans-Tasman agenda and the single economic market. You watch, my prediction will be we'll get over the climate change issues.
And just to show that commitment, government ministers were bussed to the Australian Navy's Sydney base for a joint Australian-New Zealand cabinet meeting. This is the third visit to Australia by New Zealand's Prime Minister in just 9 months, but never before has any country been afforded such access to Australia's senior government ministers. Trade, defence and environment ministers were at the table, along with transport, tourism and perhaps not surprisingly, New Zealand's Minister for Rugby Union.
Such bilateral integration is not uncommon as a springboard to encompass neighbouring nations in a region and is another backdoor approach to circumvent any regional impasse. It also bears noting that even though the major regions and their locations are generally established, the member nation makeup of each region is a bit fluid, as has been apparent in Europe, Eurasia, and the South Pacific. This is reflective of populations and/or their rulers' personality conflicts, historical prejudices, and other considerations as they relate to ongoing integration efforts. In their determination to corral nations into various regional blocs, globalist negotiators will take the path of least resistance to do so. Such is the case with ASEAN, the 10-member association of Southeast Asian nations. The recent Obama administration Asia pivot is reflective of the uncertain, fluid nature of the regional interactions in East and South Asia. ASEAN includes all East Asian nations with 5 notable, non-aligned exceptions: Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, and North Korea. China is large enough and powerful enough to be its own region, and that may well become the case. China is the only nation within the emerging industrial BRICS group, consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that is not a dominant anchor nation within a regional bloc. Currently, China is fulfilling the role of antagonist to the Southeast Asian region, prompting a circle-the-wagons reaction toward integration among the ASEAN nations. Indeed, the crisis-creating antagonist has been employed to accelerate every regional integration effort since the Cold War's Soviet Union, and its Warsaw Pact first spurred the integration of the European community's common market. However, ASEAN and China have recently partnered up in a regional free trade agreement, and overtures have been extended to Japan and South Korea as well, in the form of ASEAN +3 discussions. Although not all free trade agreements evolve into geopolitical regions, all regions at some point embrace free trade agreements. However unlikely that a regional framework involving all of these nations may appear today, the recent awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to the European Union was meant to send a direct message to exactly such historical enemies as China, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula, as well as to SAARC member nations with historic enmity, India and Pakistan. That message is that if longtime enemies Germany and France can become regional partners, so can you. One projection of a final East Asian regional agreement foresees only Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan entering ASEAN, and China joining SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Another scenario envisions a completely new Eastern Asia region apart from ASEAN, which may include the reunification of Taiwan with China, or of the Korean Peninsula, perhaps in the aftermath of an order out of chaos crisis situation. As modern geopolitics has shown, long-time arrangements cannot be assumed to be set in concrete, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It appears, however, that China is leaning more towards SAARC, despite some reservations from SAARC's current anchor nation, India, also a historic rival of China. Some officials in SAARC are courting China as a possible member, foreseeing that scenario as better for them than seeing China join ASEAN.
Over a number of years, we intend to build on this relationship in a staged way to a full force of around 2,500 personnel. That is a full marine, air, ground task force. A second component of these initiatives, which we have agreed, is greater access by US military aircraft to the Royal Australian Air Force facilities in our country's north. This will involve more frequent movements of US military aircraft into and out of Northern Australia.
Obama's Asia pivot is meant to bring American umbrella security into Southeast Asia, as all of the various regional arrangements there are sorted out, just as US umbrella security has remained in Europe throughout the decades of building the European Union. It is not accurate to say that American military and foreign aid policy since World War II has turned into mere nation building. It is more than that. For decades it has been, and remains to this day, region building. Region building is the ultimate in big government, big business central planning. But the benefits being presented for region building are illusory. Some would argue that it brings security among the nations within each of the world's regions, and that less distinct borders bring efficiency to multinational business and trade initiatives. However, the efficiency so desired by these big government, big business interests smacks of Mussolini fascism.
As industrialization was improved, Mussolini boasted that only he could make the trains run on time.
Consolidation of national governments into the hands of a few regional bureaucrats does not bring security. Rather, it results in a fascist repression of all people, as big government regulation, influenced by foundation finance monopolists, and transnational corporate interests, stifle small business, free enterprise, and the independence of nations, both economic and political. Region building threatens security, since the nation-state is the ultimate check against governing powers' inevitable urge to consolidate and expand. Border security is meant to be somewhat cumbersome and redundant, as a check to anarchist, subversive behavior by populations, factions, and powers, both foreign and domestic. Liberty is more secure when jurisdiction is local and the state is distinct and sovereign, rather than becoming merely a branch office of a vast regional jurisdiction that controls an amalgamated area of similar branches. Another prime example of U.S. region building is with the Arab nations of the Persian Gulf, or, as those nations like to say, the Arab Gulf region. Their regional bloc is named the Gulf Cooperation Council, and it may well be the bloc furthest along the path to a regional political union, second only to the European Union.
The 30th Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, summit kicked off Monday in Kuwait City. During the two-day meeting, the leaders are expected to discuss a wide range of issues, including Dubai debt crisis and ratification of a monetary union agreement. The summit will address plans aiming eventually at the establishment of a Gulf Central Bank and set a timetable for the monetary union among 4 out of 6 members, as the UAE and Oman opted out of the currency union. The summit is also expected to inaugurate the first phase of Gulf electricity grid that will cover Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. The second phase will cover the UAE and Oman, as the third phase will see the linking of the two networks. GCC member states have implemented a series of strategies amid economic crisis, and the strengthened economic cooperation in the region helps countries maintain their economic stability under the impacts of financial crisis.
The GCC also is not wasting a good crisis to accelerate integration, as they take advantage of the motivation given them by the nation assuming the role of their chief antagonist, Iran.
The leaders of the 6 Arab Gulf states have been watching Iran and growing nervous. They've announced a plan to unite their military forces. Members of the Gulf Cooperation Council met in the Bahraini capital, Manama. They decided to bring their air, land, and marine forces under a single authority.
We agreed to set up a unified military command and focus our defense capacities to counter external threats.
Many Gulf states are ruled by Sunni Muslims, but Shias are staging anti-government campaigns in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Governments in the region say Shia-dominated Iran is instigating the protests.
Massive amounts of military and infrastructure assistance and U.S. umbrella military security have been transferred to this group of nations, headed by Saudi Arabia. Western globalists and global development funding institutions are heavily pushing the region to take the final step to become the Arab Gulf Union. An announcement that the GCC nations are establishing their common currency could now come at any time. The Gulf currency would be the first regional currency in existence other than the EU's euro.